Rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
I didn't grow up with that.
Okay, so I think we are starting with the superintendent's update today.
Yes, great. And to kick us off today, I've invited John Green, our Director of Technology, who has a great kind of report about the state of the department. And I think what we tried to do here too, as well as give you the technical details, is to include information that I think answers some of the questions that have come up in recent public participation, so that that's sort of folded in. But then any other questions you have at the end, we'll be able to tackle that. I do want to allow John to get out of here early if possible to actually get some fresh air and sunshine. So we'll do the kind of discussion and questions right at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Good evening. So there's a technology update for this year, and it was working a second ago. Yep, there we go. All right, so just a quick sort of layout of where we're going, agenda for where we're going with this. It's got quite a few slides. And so starting off with the value of technology to our teaching and learning.
John, do you mind just moving the mic a little closer? We can't hear you.
Okay, better?
Yes.
Great. All right, thank you. So our value for teaching and learning for technology, one of our primary guiding principles is universal design for learning, and technology is a way to support that. It helps support students and teachers with multiple means of engagement, representation, and multiple means of expression and action. And so this UDL framework, this helps all learners access the curriculum to the greatest extent possible. So it's you know, the rising tide that lifts all boats, or some such analogy. And so that's one of our good values for technology. Among our guidelines for teaching with technology is that it should support active learning and be intentional and well supervised. It should not include watching stories and videos on iPads as a substitute for book reading. There are times when that may be appropriate for the student and the curriculum, but it is only for when it's appropriate that way. It's not a free choice or recess time, and we are aware of cumulative screen time for students throughout the day at the different grade levels. So just a quick run through of what we do at the different grade levels. So in pre-K, we have a classroom set of iPads that the students use when the teacher designates. Kindergarten through third grade, each student has an iPad that's assigned to them that stays at school. And with those iPads, they use their Clever and their Google accounts to access resources. In 4 through 6, again, one iPad for each student. In fourth grade, the iPads stay at school. The fifth grade, they start traveling home as the teacher decides and the students are ready. And sixth grade mostly travels with the students to and from school. And again, these students use their Google accounts with these iPads. For grades 7 through 9, we have a school district Chromebook for each student using their Google account. And those travel with the student to and from school and home. And then for grades 10 through 12, we have personal devices, bring your own, with their Google account. And so this progression of iPad to Chromebook to bring your own gives students a range of experiences with different tools and technologies. And by the 10th grade, allows them to choose the one that they feel most productive with and what works best for their work. Some of the safeguards we have. So while on the school network, we have grade level category-based content filtering to make sure that the students see what's age appropriate. And we also enforce YouTube restricted mode and Google Safe Search. When students are off the network, the iPads are configured to limit adult content in browsing and media, and Chromebooks enforce the YouTube restricted mode and Google Safe Search. And for student data and privacy protections, we only share minimal data with our Google account and other vendors, and we prioritize vendors that provide strong student data privacy agreements. And the other side of our technology is the operations. So our non-academic, non-instructional staff, administrators, leaders, and other staff, giving them access to the Google Collaboration Suite via laptops and desktops helps them to be productive with our various collaboration tools, Docs, Slides, Meet, Gmail, et cetera. And we also work to streamline workflows and automate data flows within the district to increase efficiency, capacity, and responsiveness. So we are a department of 17 people, 17 FTEs, spread among the schools. Our model is typically for each school to have, for the K-3 schools anyway, to have a computer support technician and a building technology specialist paraeducator. And those are primarily stationed at the school and with the school, and the paraeducators are our first line of contact and support for classroom teachers and students. At the other, going up, we have additional paraeducator at Mill Pond, and then computer support specialists at Mill Pond Gibbons at the high school. District-wide, we have an AV coordinator, an IT infrastructure administrator, data specialist, data architect, and then me, the director. So we keep track of a lot of stuff. Big long list, I won't read it, but it's just basically if it plugs in the wall, has a blinking green light, makes a sound, chances are we're there for it. And then for the virtual things we do, there are various software and services. PowerSchool obviously is the big one, Google Identity Management. We do our web hosting, and we manage our our hosted web service, as well as various other online services for back office operations, also student data privacy, computer-based testing, state reporting, device management, and again, kind of the data flow and data management of our databases. So our budget trends for the last few years, 6 years, these tend to go on a 5 years, these tend to peak every 5 years, which corresponds to when we started buying laptops for teachers. We had 2 big years where we were kind of like pushed all in to make it get done quickly as possible, which means that 5 years later, which is our replacement cycle, they're up for replacement, so we're back at it again. We do try to smooth that out as best we can over those intervening years. If we can make them go a little bit longer than 5 years, that's great. So we work to try to like even that out a little bit. And that's also reflected, and you'll see it in the blue bar, the blue part goes up. That's the hardware part, so that fluctuates with those laptops and for teachers. Those are examples of what goes in those budget categories. So hardware is, basically hardware and stuff and devices. Supplies and repairs are consumables, accessories, contracted repairs, parts and materials for self-repairs to kind of keep everything running. Our software and licenses and maintenance agreements for various front office instructional and also back office and IT support systems. Just a quick breakdown of the total share of the budget for each of those categories. Again, we see some fluctuation from year to year, but overall pretty stable, relatively speaking. So the budget pressures we're seeing software vendors really wanting to raise their prices, and we keep pushing back on them. And again, within the last couple of years, we're seeing that newer laptops, tablets are coming in a little bit higher prices than their predecessors. Before that, it had been pretty much the same price year after year with better specs, and now we're starting to see the prices go up with those specs. Some of the things we've accomplished in the last fiscal year, FY24, we used ARPA and state grant funding to install a security camera system at Mill Pond. We replaced our Wi-Fi access points at the high school and got a 40% E-rate reimbursement for those. A new PA system at Armstrong, replacing aging projectors in classrooms with interactive touch panels. Added a few more cameras at Gibbons and the high school, and we did our new signage at the upstairs here at the Forbes building. Next year, this year, FY25, Wi-Fi replacement at Mill Pond and Fales, PA at Hastings, and more classroom replacement of aging classroom projectors. And looking ahead, a camera system at Armstrong is on our list of need to do, as well as, again, more classroom projector replacement. It seems like a lot of projector replacement. We have 300 classrooms, so that's a lot a lot of projectors. So hardware prices are rising. I'll get to tariffs and stuff in a minute. But before all that blew up, we were seeing those increases, not as great as in software, but still seeing some increases. And those increases might have been tapering off. Software prices rising sharply. Again, especially when these are companies owned by private equity, they're pushing really hard to monetize their clients, their customers. And just the reduction in the technology budget, it will delay the replacement of classroom projectors that reach their usable life, but we have ways to deal with that without blowing things up or getting dug in a deep hole. Looking ahead for FY27, we're looking at hopefully at least a partial restoration of the cut from FY26. We want to finish building out the security cameras at Hastings. There were some installed with the preschool construction. We want to finish building those out so it's on par with the ones we have at the other schools. Potential risks we're seeing, price increases due to monopoly pricing, tariffs, and inflation. Every 1% increase is, just about $10,000 hit to the budget. So keeping an eye on those things and trying to do the best we can with those. There's some question about whether E-rate will continue past this year or beyond. I think we're going to be okay with this year, assuming that there are enough people there to actually approve the funding. But after that, I don't know. But the good news is that after this FY25 E-rate, our reimbursement requests are going to go down because we'll be done replacing access points. And so it'll just be ongoing licensing for our firewall and for our internet access. So we'll at least have a smaller exposure there. And our usual busy summer, turning around student devices, doing our network and server infrastructure maintenance, replacing Wi-Fi at Mill Pond and Fales. And so I've got a good crew for that. I know that went through kind of quick, but hopefully you had a chance to read the memo beforehand, and happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Let's start with Steve.
Yeah, tell us about what you think the issues associated with the federal government in terms of any additional support for our technology here. Obviously, the purchase of equipment is subject to whatever happens in terms of increases in taxes associated with the purchase of foreign equipment, which most of the stuff is, I would think. Program based on grants and state funding and federal funding.
Yes, if I understand your question correctly, we don't have a lot of exposure for hardware purchases from the federal government. We don't get a lot of money for that. E-rate is our primary way that we get money from the federal government for hardware purchases. And so we're mostly through with that. And other than that, there may be fewer grant opportunities for the cameras at Armstrong or Hastings. I don't think we were really planning on those. We were fortunate when the Mill Pond one came up that we're able to get that and combine that with the ARPA funding. So it's just, and then anything that happens at the state level, at the federal level, will impact the state as they try to fill the gap or not. So yeah, those are $1 million questions.
Thanks.
Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great. I don't know if you can comment, but I'm wondering if our technology practices, like the types of devices we deploy at different grade levels, how we use technology in the classroom, is it consistent with other districts, our comparison districts? And if it isn't, how does it differ?
I can't speak to our comparison districts. I don't know if Daniel has any. I've not been to those districts and seen how they're using technology.
Yeah, I don't have like hard data on that.
I mean, my sense is that from a IT perspective and what I hear and read going by in the circles, that we do pretty well. I think we tend to use our technology at a higher level than some other districts. But I think that really speaks to the teacher training and quality and professional development that comes through from the assistant superintendent.
And so are you asking about actual teaching and learning or deployment in terms of number of devices and student hands?
Sort of both, and just like the classroom technology and how we use it. I mean, we had a cut this year, so I'm wondering if that's going to put us at jeopardy of kind of falling behind other districts in, our innovation and how we're, delivering the education to our students.
Yeah, I think John was speaking to the cuts as mainly impacting projectors this year. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the projectors are just, they start to dim, and so the quality of the visual, is that mainly what goes?
Yes, yep.
So in terms of actual, so the presentation can be obscured and less crisp for the students, but in terms of actually having devices, nothing will be changing next year. We are pretty clear with faculty, and they're also, this is the approach they use, is that the devices are to be used, for particular purposes that are not like reading books and not just they're not distractions, they're just enhancements. And so they're used for research, they're used for collaboration, they're used for, creation of products, but they're definitely, you walk through the high school and the middle school and you will see several, most of the time you'll walk through and you will not see the laptops open unless it's a specific request of the teacher. They're not just always present. And the same thing at Mill Pond. You just don't see the devices in the hands of students like routinely, right, when you walk in. It's not what you see. And I think some parents maybe get the impression, because they don't go walking through the classrooms, that the kids are sitting there with the devices always open. But it's not that way.
I can speak a little bit too, just comparatively. This is a different set of districts because I was primarily in Metro West, but did a fair amount of work in this. And, it's very typical to have iPads in the hands of the little ones, to transition to Chromebooks sometime in middle school, and then to transition either to keep a Chromebook all the way through high school or to transition to some other type of device in the older grades. Many districts start sending the devices home right around 5th, 6th grade, so that's also pretty typical. And in terms of use, I'd echo what Daniel said. I just, as a person kind of coming in with a new pair of eyes and walking around the district, I've been really impressed by teachers' sort of judiciousness and balance. Every once in a while you'll see kids on a device at a station in an elementary class as part of a kind of rotation of things where they are a little bit more isolated and on their own, but, often they're engaging with a pretty high quality resource. So it's not like they're, just messing about, which, can be tempting. And I haven't seen evidence of a lot of really distracted behavior either, which is nice, because that can be a thing too, for sure. When these devices first sort of hit the educational landscape, I think teachers had a little bit of a love-hate relationship with them, in that, you could hand them out, but trying to sort of manage it. But folks have learned a lot about how to do that well. So I think it's going well.
I was going to add to that I think that just in speaking with some friends in surrounding towns, I think we were really at the forefront of being able to get to the point of one-to-one on devices. I think that other towns are getting there and are there now, but I think we were really forward thinking and starting that early, and we were able to have the resources, fortunately, to do that, which sort of then, I'll ask my question later, but it does make me take pause to think about, a little bit of our dependence on this, and then with potential cuts coming, or just the tariffs alone, and I'm not sure how that's going to necessarily affect us in the hardware supply, but whether we may need to pivot just for purely financial reasons and how we're going to handle that. But I do think that we're definitely up there in terms of being able to supply the kids with this technology one-to-one, which I know Allison mentioned that in the Metro West, they're able, you have the age groups and some of them are having the Chromebooks, but others are having iPads. I remember in Shrewsbury, a lot of the districts cannot send them home because they don't have enough. So they're having kids share them. So I do think we've been fortunate enough to be able to do that with our student population. But go ahead, Jakub.
Thank you. You don't have any more questions?
No.
Can I interject, though, on just that point that Sarah was making? One thing to keep in mind is the model before we started to have like mobile devices available was having a lab that teachers would take their kids down to. You probably remember that, right? And so you'd sign up for a lab and one day out of the week, you could take your kids down there. It's not a very effective tool when you're teaching to have that kind of model where, you have to like stop, drop everything, move on down. Not that we would go back to that, but if you are sharing devices in the classroom and it's not a lab situation, but you're sharing devices, it still is it's definitely a disruption in terms of having everybody open their laptops. I want you to download this. I want you to, work on this specific task and share it with your, your neighbor or something like that. It does mean that just like with the lab situation, you're getting to a less, it's like a suboptimal teaching situation.
Hi, John. Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate that you included, you addressed a few concerns that were brought up recently by the residents at this committee. So I did notice that, and I appreciate. I hope those people that were raising those issues appreciate them as well. Could you just tell me a little bit? I have a couple of questions and then some ideas that I want to bounce around. Mm-hmm. So one is, how long do we keep the iPads, Chromebooks before we rotate them? You mentioned 5 years?
So teacher laptops is 5 years. iPads for K3 go for 4 years. And then iPads for Mill Pond go 3 years. And then our Chromebooks go 3 years.
And then do we get any money out of that, out of those retired devices? Are they traded in?
So our first priority is to reuse them elsewhere in the district where we're able to. So Chromebooks that come out of 9th grade can be pretty rough. But we find those that are good and usable, and we save those for computer-based testing. It makes MCAS easier and AP and those other computer-based testing easier to have those available. And with the iPads, those go to teachers, those go to other classrooms, other places where they can be used with students. And then once we've satisfied all those needs internally, then we, the rest is surplus.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. I was wondering, I know we have the policy for the bring your own device for the 10th grade and above. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm speaking from my own experience. I know a lot of kids these days have their own devices, have their own iPads, so they're often much faster than the ones that are offered by the school. Mm-hmm. Have you ever considered allowing the bring your own device model in the younger grades? Not for everybody, but for those that opt in, obviously with all kinds of waivers. I mean, the device will have to be entered into your system. I know you do content filtering on the network side, so you don't have to worry about that option. But I think maybe that could bring some savings into the hardware program.
So I think we do see that in 9th grade. And I think we tend to have some flexibility for 9th graders who are at the high school and bring a device and want to use that because the teachers there are used to that, and that's not so. Unfortunately, by the time they reach 9th grade, we've already paid for the device back in 7th grade, and they've used it for 7th and 8th. So in that sense, I'm not immediately seeing cost avoidance by buying fewer units. It may be that those units that they use for 7th and 8th and don't use for 9th, they're in better shape, and we use those more internally for cost savings there. And we have not talked about BYOD at the middle school.
Just an idea. I mean, I know some of those devices can be quite slow, or the battery charge, doesn't hold very long, and kids oftentimes already have those devices at home. So it seems to me like it could be an opportunity, maybe worth exploring.
Yeah, it's definitely something we're thinking about. We also think about equity issues and in terms of kids having different devices, especially in middle school, and also it may be that home devices which have different chargers or different charge types than a Chromebook might introduce some complexity there as well. I don't know. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean,
idea.
You could narrow it down to like a list of acceptable devices,
Just to clarify too, so in the high school, they are bringing only their personal devices. They're not given devices. You may know that.
From 10th grade. From 10th grade and above, right?
Is it 10th grade? Okay, perhaps. Okay, yeah.
So the other idea I had that, I don't know, this is a question to you, I guess, and to the district at large. Is there any possibility, because about software licensing? So I see that the cost of licensing is going up, and that's a significant portion of your budget. Is there any option that we could get some kind of bargains through the collaboratives to bundle those licenses as larger sets of customers through the collaboratives, like we are doing with the transportation?
It's an interesting question. I think so. The Tech Collaborative, which is down kind of out of Walpole, they have become a leader not only in the state but in the nation in data privacy review, and so different collaboratives have stepped into the void around different types of issues, and collaboratives do often use their collective power for other types of purchasing, like negotiating contracts with WB Mason to sort of bring down the cost of paper and things like that. It's definitely an interesting idea where software licensing is concerned. There might be some challenges, but given that we already have within the state a collaborative that's sort of a leader in one angle on the technology, and I might happen to know the executive director of that collaborative, I think it's a great idea. It's been enormously important, I would say, for many, many districts throughout the state. So, yeah, thank you.
And if I can add to that, I think it's an opportunity at the state level as well for the OSD to provide state contract pricing, negotiate state contract pricing with some of these vendors. They can offer a statewide savings.
Yeah, that's a great idea too. Yeah. Okay, thank you. A few more questions. Almost done. Are there still any paper-based workflows that you're going to digitize, or are you pretty much done with that?
Oh gosh. I think we're still digitizing high school records, student transcripts and other, the ones we keep for 70 years. I think we're digitizing those. In terms of our current workflows, I don't do a lot of paper recs or anything like that. I'm sure they must exist somewhere, and probably for a good reason. But I think for the most part, we've done pretty well. Do you recall seeing any?
I actively worked to get rid of the ones that were going over my desk several years ago. Yeah, we had triplicate paper, and But no, I know there's nothing. There's no paper like forms anymore that I know of.
Okay, that's great. I have a question. I know. I mean, I can probably answer it myself, but I would prefer that you do. I have a question about the two positions that are in the district, and I think it would be beneficial for the public as they're poking around our budget. We have a data specialist and a data architect. Mm-hmm. Could you explain what these roles are in our district?
Sure. Yeah. So the data specialist is primarily tasked with state reporting. And there's a lot of it. There's state reporting, federal reporting, and so that's a primary function for that role. The data architect is for doing data analysis and data, automating data flows between databases. So there's programming and there's syncing, and so we have a lot of, with our cloud-based systems and our on-prem systems, moving data from PowerSchool to other the other places as necessary. And so that team there is really the one doing all of our workflow automation. And they're the ones we can thank for, parent sign-offs in PowerSchool Parent Portal, especially with, no more first day packets of writing out the same information you wrote out the last 4 years again and again and again. It's all right there saved in PowerSchool. You can just check it, nothing's changed. So those are the kinds of the tasks that they do. Thank you.
And one last question. This is, of course, we have to talk about AI. And, I know the school has a workshop or the working group are coming up. I was just wondering, I imagine that there will be large language models that are specialized to K-12 education or even to specific grades that you can use as a tutor, as a grader. I don't know if you're really thinking about deploying a language model that's trained on Westborough school system data that's safe to use for the kids, and it won't write the essays for them, but maybe it can grade them or tutor them. Just an idea that if you're already thinking about it.
Yeah, it's certainly early days. I know working with our professional development team, one of the ones that interested me was the Notebook LM, which uses Google Gemini, and you can feed it a bunch of Google Drive documents, and it will use those as the training data for the model. And those can be very interesting and give you some good, interesting results based on a very specific, known data set. So I think that one might be have some interesting promise as long as we're able to work with the academic integrity side of it, so that we know which thinking is the student thinking, we know which thinking is the model output.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Hi, John. Thank you for your presentation. My first question is relating to the personal device policy in 10 through 12. So if a student doesn't have a personal device for some reason, are they still able to access the Chromebooks?
Yes. Yeah, we provide devices for students that don't have one.
Gotcha. And are those on, I know we're talking about how we recycle some of the ones that are a little bit older and things like that, like those students would be getting new Chromebooks, is that correct, instead of like the recycled ones that are being taken out of commission?
That is our intention. Sometimes, when in the moment when we have what we have, but it's our goal to give them new and latest and not recycled.
And very glad that is the intention. And it sounds like it does happen on occasion, at least, that one of the students would be receiving one of the older Chromebooks.
I'm sure it has happened, despite all our best intentions.
And then I believe as well, in Yakub's question, you had said that currently the life of an iPad for the younger students in the elementary schools are 3 years, and then for the slightly older students are 4 years. Is that correct?
It's reversed.
It's reversed. Oh, interesting.
So it's 4 years for the younger students and 3 for the older.
I would just be curious if you could speak at all to any efforts that we do as a district to help preserve the hardware in terms of like cases, things like that, just educating the students on how to take care of them, just to make sure that we're getting as much life as we can.
Yes, we do all those things. We provide good, solid, rugged cases for them, and also start them off with good care and feeding habits early on. And that's one of the reasons why we no longer buy insurance or accidental damage protection for the iPads, because we have so little breakage. The students take very good care of them and do a nice job.
Which is great to hear. And then just one final question, and this might be geared more so towards Allison and Daniel, but just in the conversation that we're having, as Jane asked and Yakub a little bit, and obviously with the citizens' comments, I'm just curious, is there any potential opportunity, we've already talked about how we feel like the overall use is appropriate and is good, and we might not have data from comparisons, but just based on what we're seeing, are there any areas of opportunity that you do think we could potentially look at in terms of reducing technology use?
A good question. I guess I would need to know. I think, I don't know if you all saw this here, but when many of these things first came out, there was sort of a moment in time where there was just a a lot of PowerPoint happening in especially the secondary level classes and things like that. And my sense is the pendulum has already sort of started to swing back toward more balance, and particularly, interestingly, AI is pushing it even further. So the fact of this outside thing is kind of really having an impact on thinking about the task assignment that we, what are we asking kids to do and why? And that feels like a very healthy part of the whole thing to me. But I think those are important ongoing conversations to have. I just would want them to be with a clarity that there's a purpose to reduction, not just reduction for the sake of reduction. Like, we need to be kind of mindful of those things that John pointed out at the start. Universal design for learning is a framework that actually came out of the architecture movement. It started out as sort of physical access to buildings, thinking about how do you help the greatest number of people kind of get into and navigate through a museum, for example. And it landed in education and really has had great influence in our thinking about how do we put tools in the hands of kids, how do we help teachers develop strategies so that more kids have greater access to greater learning. And technology's been a huge piece of that, and we wouldn't want to roll that part back. So I think we have to just be thoughtful about not less for the sake of less, but if there are things that we're doing that aren't purposeful, we want to back off of those. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. One is, so we are actually, I think if in terms of maintenance of hardware, if the child, cracks a screen or something like that, I think the parent, we do pay to have those repaired, right, as a parent?
Yes, not the full price.
Okay, right. So there's some sort of fee structure for that.
Yes.
Okay, so that's good, because my daughter said that the dog jumped on her book pack, and we don't have a dog, so, and then it cracked her screen, so she had to, but I was curious about that as to, so we do work to maintain those devices. Also, what percentage of our high school kids, so I guess 10 through 12, are needing devices to be supplied to them?
A small percentage, I would say 20 to 30 students.
Okay.
In the, so maybe 10 or 15 per grade.
Okay.
At any given time.
That's not too bad. Just trying to wrap my brain around that. And then finally, just trying to understand if you could clarify a little bit about the filters. So you make mention here about putting filters on in the evenings, right? I think you said something about that in the presentation. I have to go back. Is there any filters on the devices for when children take them home?
Yeah, so when they're off our network, the iPads have a configuration that restricts adult content for search and media, and the Chromebooks have a Google Safe Search. And
tell me where you want to go. The clicker's not working, so I'm just helping you here.
I had one up there earlier about security measures and safety.
Safeguards. Yeah, safeguards, I think, right?
Yeah, safeguard. Yeah.
Did I pass it?
No.
Keep going back.
There we go.
Okay. So do you think that that is sufficient, or I was trying to understand the concept of bricking and not being able to give them any sort of internet access except for very limited, maybe the different softwares that are associated with the softwares that are being used specifically for homework assignments, just trying to understand if there's any opportunity to do that.
Right, so we need to be, we the tech department want to be mindful of the range of parent perspectives and not make decisions for parents that they want to make themselves. So in that case, there are, families can do, Wi-Fi restrictions. In my house, our Wi-Fi went off at, when my kids were younger, our Wi-Fi went off at, 8 o'clock. And then came back on at 6, and then got a little bit later as they got older. In terms of the district providing that service to families at home, That's not something that we currently do. There are some districts that have some of these services or products that do monitoring at home. We made the decision not to do that because we wanted to not have questions about, what's the school doing on my kid's iPad at night when they're at home, kind of thing. So we leave that in the hands of the parents to make the best decisions for their families and their kids.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I also would think, though, that when we're talking about property that's school property, versus the 10 to 12 devices, 10 to 12th grade devices, those are belong to the kids. But anything that's school property, I think that it would be not unreasonable to tailor it to exactly, and if a parent wants to give their sixth grader their own device, that's something that they are absolutely able to do. But I would think that it wouldn't be totally unreasonable for us to put pretty strict filters on things so that we're able to really control what's going out through those devices. But just a thought.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. So I think you're going to be talking to us about the letter to the congressional delegation.
Yeah, I wanted to share that with you just as a sort of snapshot of advocacy going on at the state level and concern coming from the Massachusetts Superintendents Association around some of the impact of federal cuts in the Department of Education in terms of staffing, but also in terms of potential cuts to funding. And I just want to be able to kind of keep up a drumbeat of keeping an eye on this, talking about it. I don't have a particular update here, but one of the things that I appreciate about this is it really does break down specific impacts in different areas, including groups of students whose lives are very directly impacted by this funding. I know right now superintendents throughout the state are sort of awaiting some direction from the Attorney General's office and the State Secretary of Education around essentially a sign-off that the Federal Department of Education has created around access to funds. So we're kind of waiting to see what transpires with that. I think the thing that point I tried to make briefly at town meeting, which I think is very important for people to realize, is that the positions impacted. So a lot of our money under IDEA, for example, goes to support paraprofessionals. Many of those folks are in jobs that are very specifically required by students' educational plans. They're not optional jobs. We cannot cut those jobs. So if the funding for them goes, we're going to have to sort of reallocate funding from somewhere else, which could mean a lot of different things in terms of budgetary impact. So this is, not intended to be scary. It is scary. It's kind of the reality of what things look like right now. But I did want you to be aware that the superintendents have kind of leadership that are very actively involved in working with state governance and advocating at a national level as well around trying to not hold children hostage in kind of political brinksmanship. So I am hopeful that cooler heads will prevail and federal funding will come back to where it belongs in terms of supporting children. So.
Thank you. And then I guess we have your entry findings.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry about that.
I think, I'll ask the question, but I think I know what the number is. In regards to these things that are now being refocused, if you will, from the federal government, for which we receive money.
Yes.
How much money are we talking about that we might have to replace somehow by cuts somewhere else in our budget?
Right. So overall, I think the total was about $1.5 million in terms of federal funds, and then impact among those funds going to staffing positions, about 900. About $930,000. So that's a significant number of staff. And it's important to note that many of the positions that we're funding are not full-time teaching staff or administrators, they're paraprofessional staff. So when you do the math on those positions, it would be quite a few people, probably in the range of 20 to 30 positions throughout the district. So that's just a sense of scale.
And again, the squeeze is because state law requires us to supply those services in that amount of money.
Yeah.
But that in the past, we were being supplied that money by the federal government.
Yes.
So just so everybody's aware how much of an impact that would be on the school system overall. Significant. So it's not nickels and dimes.
That is correct. I mean, another kind of, I didn't want to say this while John was here. It's not a happy thing. You'd asked about tariffs. It's just important to note our smart boards are coming from Canada, but iPads and all Apple products that we have are from China. So any refresh that we're looking at in the next few years could, unless something happens and things de-escalate, we may be faced with a kind of very different picture in terms of resupply, or even having to kind of radically shift what we do and how we do it in order to make sure we can still kind of provide the kind of high quality experiences around technology that we would want.
Perhaps I'll generalize, to be able to teach.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Anyone else? Great. We can move on to your entry findings.
Great. I had a couple other quick announcements or updates before we move through. See if it'll work here. Okay, great. First, before I dive in, I have a couple hiring updates to share. I'm pleased to let you know we completed the Director of Student Services search process, and that Meg Garvey, our internal candidate, will be our next Director of Student Services. I wrote to you a little bit about this, but I just wanted to say out loud in public, Meg's capacity to be clear about the strengths of the district and to describe a vision for the future and to share ideas for helping a strong district get even better was really tremendously clear throughout the process. We had two strong candidates for this position, and I want to thank the search committee and everyone who participated in the process throughout the entire time. I think we landed in a great place. So right now, as of today, our hiring team for the assistant superintendent position finished their initial work and has recommended 2 finalist candidates. I cannot announce them just yet. I was hoping to be able to do this tonight, but I believe one of the candidates needs to communicate with their current district, and we don't want to get out in front of that, just out of respect. But the 2 candidates will be visiting next week. I will, I believe, be able to make an announcement tomorrow. So that's exciting news. Very high quality field for this group, which is, I think, wonderful. And once again, thank you to those of you here, but also to everybody who sat on the search committee. It was great. One wrinkle we are going to introduce into the assistant superintendent finalist visit is a student panel as well. So the candidates will be meeting with various people throughout the district, visiting schools, but I'm particularly curious to see how people interact with students. I think that's an important kind of lens to have when you're somebody thinking about teaching and learning. So,
can you enlighten us as to what the format for the student review would be?
The principal, Mr. Callahan, is pulling a group of students together. It'll probably be somewhere in the 8 to 12 student range, I hope. And essentially, that group will work together to come up with questions, and it'll be like an interview. They'll have questions and answers with the candidate, just like the curriculum coordinator team, and just like the leadership team, and me.
Remember, these kids are pretty smart.
They are, yes. And I think it's important that whoever walks into the district knows that that's who they're getting. I think that they have really thoughtful, capable students, and I like that it kind of grounds the experience, and this is why we're all here, right? So that's it's a nice thing to see. Another piece here, I wanted to give you a little good news. I feel like I love highlighting things that are going on in the arts, in our co-curricular activities, things like this. The MICA festivals took place. These are the Massachusetts Instrumental and Choral Conductors Association Concert and Choral Festivals. And we actually hosted the choral festival here, and then the other festivals took place at different high schools throughout the state. Our performing arts groups, as always, performed very well. We had a lot of gold medals and silver medals. And the medals aren't, it's not like a first, second, and third place. It's not a competition, but it indicates a level of proficiency. So gold medal is an extraordinarily high level of proficiency. Silver is also an excellent performance. So those are sort of a list of our performing groups and how they did. And they have much to be proud of. Also, you know, here hosting the choral concert is a big endeavor. So congratulations to the Performing Arts Department and to the folks in the Friends of the Performing Arts who really help kind of volunteer and make it all work in the background, as well as some students from our Honor Society who helped and pitched in too. So, all right, this is into the interesting stuff here. Let me pull this up so I can see it here too. What I put together is really a slideshow that's kind of the same territory as the memo that I shared. I broke it up a little bit differently here because what I wanted to do was talk about the categories and the sort of strengths and challenges that I noticed, and then save some of the kind of the opportunities part for the end. Here so I can see. Just getting this big enough so I can actually read it. There we go. So, you know, you've heard me talk about academic strength before in the context of the budget cycle. But I do want to just remind folks, this is a place where kids are achieving at a high level. The academic scores, as indicated by the MCAS, we are outperforming the state average by a margin of about 20 points in both English and math. We are achieving very high rankings from different publications that do that ranking work. Kids are, you know, off in a whole wide array of post-secondary opportunities. And what makes that all happen is a lot of good teaching, but also some structures. We have dedicated curriculum leadership throughout the district. We have a weekly collaborative planning time throughout the district, and also a thoughtful cycle of curriculum review and improvement. Inclusive special education practices, including a lot of focus on co-teaching. There's specialized instruction happening in all the schools. And we have, I'd say, a model program for our 18 to 22-year-olds in the borough. There has been a very strong investment in ELL education, so helping our English language learners make the transition to English. And you heard about that from Letitia earlier this year. We offer world languages starting in grade 7, including Mandarin. We have very robust electives, including our music program, which I highlighted here. And at the high school, there is a kind of small but really interesting program called Quest, where students have opportunities to take kind of non-traditional pathways. So they are pursuing internships and things alongside their academic work. It's kind of often blending an academic interest and an outside interest, and some creative scheduling goes into that. Some of the challenges I noted on the academic front, even though we do have really good teachers deployed and a very, very thoughtful director, teachers have talked about the challenges of meeting the needs of all the students who are English language learners. And I think that's twofold. One is the population of English language learners has increased over the arc of the last 10 years, but it's also shifted. So students are coming to us later, older, I guess, with lower proficiency levels and less academic background. And I think those are sort of a combination of factors that makes that presents instructional challenges. And so it's thinking about how do we help teachers develop a set of strategies to support those students. What does that support look like? You know, additionally, some reports at the secondary level of some real shifts in student attendance and work habits. You know, it's just, things are different post-COVID especially, and we've heard a little bit about that. I've heard more from parents than internally, but a concern about access to some of our more rigorous coursework, that we have more student interest than we're able to accommodate in those courses. And at the high school, one solution has been to have kids have access to VHS courses. Honestly, I think we'd all rather have a course with a teacher who's right there, if at all possible. Even with all of the kind of structural pieces in place, there are still places where there's room for improvement in terms of consistency, classroom to classroom, particularly in the humanities. The math science seems a little bit more aligned. We don't currently have a robust sequence for K-12 for digital literacy and computer science. Currently, our librarians are shouldering some of this in the earlier grades. There's a robotics opportunity in grades 7 and 8, and then it kind of shifts over into elective opportunities at the high school level. But those standards that were released a few years ago are really powerful standards, and it'd be a wonderful opportunity to think about how do we build something out that's a more regular drumbeat for all students. Financial literacy is something I've heard about from folks. You know, there's a great business department at the high school. That's an elective program, though. And so how do you make sure all kids that leave us, and I'm sure all parents want this, with a baseline of some sort of financial literacy skills, and trying to figure out where to fit that, how to fit it in, what age to start, and what it looks like. And then, of course, you know, we've talked about this before, there are real challenges and as well as opportunities with generative AI. So it's sort of an academic snapshot. And again, this is a summary. These are some of the details of things, but the kind of complete report with data is coming in May, so you'll be able to see in a little bit deeper dive. Like I'm doing my own slides, but not yours here. Kind of the second theme had to do with caring and supportive schools. I cannot say enough about the culture here and how highly inclusive it is. I think people do a particularly extraordinary job just making sure that kids are educated in the least restrictive environment possible. There's exceptional support for kids, an array of learners in terms of both academic, social, and emotional support. There's proactive SEL curriculum at all levels, and there's, you know, real research behind that. I know sometimes people think of SEL as this sort of nicey nice thing, but there's a lot of a body of research out there about how those kind of soft skills are so critical for success in future life, and being able to teach about them explicitly at an early age really sets kids up for kind of better problem solving, better interpersonal relationships, and just better management of their sort of time and lives. There's a real kind of emphasis on wellness here, both in terms of curriculum and activities. We have a great team around ELL, again, that kind of works both in the support and the academic side. And you'll see in this, some of these things don't fit neatly into one category or another, so they crop up a few different times. Additionally, there's a strong culture around community service, and a promotion of kindness is a real core value in the district. There's a thoughtful protocol that the district worked very hard on in terms of how to address issues of hate and bias when they come up. And I think having sort of watched administrators work on that, the response is it's quick, it's decisive, and it's very thoughtful and supportive. And then finally, so the district has really invested in efforts to help kids learn about diverse cultures and identities. I was at Mill Pond School, and where Sarah was among the folks there, but they have a World Religion Day where folks from kind of different religious traditions and faiths came in a panel discussion at the start, and then kids had the opportunity to go and visit classrooms and do kind of a deep dive, learn a little bit about faiths that may not be their own. And it was wonderful. I think the speakers did a great job. The kids were really respectful. And I have no doubt that many of them walked away with understanding that they did not have before. Challenges on this front, I had mentioned federal policy change means some of those kind of grant supports are going to go away, and it's going to make us have a bit of a scramble, I think, for how do we fund this? Or I'm not saying they are going away, I'm saying I'm worried they're going away. But we do, even with all these things in place, educators are asking for some additional help with ELL support. We've talked in the past, and Tim is sitting in on a group that's looking at the cell phone social media policy. And I think educators, parents, and even students themselves had noted that, social media and cell phones are an area where we're seeing increased distraction, isolation, conflict on the school side, and then the wider body of research suggests that it's linked to some real mental health issues as well. So we are grappling with that and going to be landing that plane sometime soon in terms of thinking about policy. I wanted to note student attendance. I took a look at some data, and these are trends that exist throughout the state. This is not Westborough, but there has been increasing absenteeism post-COVID, both for students and staff. And one of the things we know about schools is they work better when people are here. I know that sounds sort of basic, but it's true. I mean, there's a ton of research, and one of the research pieces about staffing and what's effective in classrooms is this sort of degree to which there's consistency in attendance makes a huge difference for kids. So thinking a little bit about that, the norms have shifted around illness, and some of that's probably not bad. We don't want people coming to school and infecting everyone else, obviously. But at the same time, what are we doing kind of around promoting wellness and trying to help make sure that we're sort of part of a system of building a kind of more resilient students and staffs. And then finally, these things that folks have been working on, culturally responsive practices and universal design. I spoke about universal design earlier. That's been a big focus of the last few years. But prior to that, the district really was engaged in work around practices in the classroom that are kind of open to more, or that help students sort of see themselves and see the rest of the world through the classroom. And it's thinking about decision-making around curriculum. It's thinking about instructional strategy, ways to make sure that kids sort of feel seen and heard and like they belong in the place. And I think those things are out there, but there's still room to kind of have them sink into the fabric of how we do business. On the community side, this place, there is just such remarkable support for the schools. I think partnerships with outside community organizations are strong. There is much collaboration with municipal offices. I'd say particularly on the operations side of the house, our folks in business and finance, our folks in the kind of building and grounds crew do a really great job reaching out across the street and over to the DPW and working together on behalf of everybody in the town. There's support from local businesses, the borough program, a lot of fundraising by local groups. We've got nice media coverage thanks to Westborough TV and also the Community Advocate. And we have this sort of gem of an organization, Westborough Connects, which sort of works hard to tie everything together for folks in town. One interesting challenge that came up repeatedly in sort of talking with people in different groups is this challenge of kind of a fading level of participation among some of the groups. So all-night graduation party, the parent groups, some of the volunteer-run organizations, the Friends of the Performing Arts and the Friends of the Fine Arts, they're really having to work very hard to pull in folks to participate. And the question is like, what do we do about that? How do you keep these organizations that really support the schools strong. They also, frankly, are great organizations that are sort of co-support places where parents can find other people who help them sort of navigate parenting. You know, it's a way of reaching out and talking to people about what your kid's going through and realizing that you're not alone, right? In, you know, having a 7th grader and what that's like. So thinking about that. And my last, you know, long list. There are many long lists on this. This is not a, you know, great presentation from a slideshow perspective. You know, in terms of stability, this is a district that has enjoyed tremendous operational stability, really good staffing levels, well-maintained buildings and grounds. Resources here are treated carefully. I've been impressed by that. People are not throwing money around. They are targeting it so that it is going toward student programming and student use. You know, there are strong practices in terms of recruiting and hiring and retaining staff. And I think those practices have helped us come out of the post-COVID staffing crunch better than a lot of places. We have a very experienced and highly competent leadership team and really good, clear communication protocols. So I think one of the things I've appreciated coming in new is whenever anything happens, I know about it. People have been great about sort of looping me in and letting me know if there are incidents that come up so that we're able to sort of act together and support each other. And finally, kind of really nice partnership with the other municipal departments who think about safety, so the police department, the fire department. Some of our challenges, and some of these you're aware of because they came out a little bit in the budget process. We've mentioned before, our budget documentation has not yet been aligned with the state's sort of requirements around chart of accounts. So that's a project we're just about to dive right into and hope to have all cleaned up and buttoned up so it'll start to give us data that's more comparable to other districts, which is nice. As you know, we've seen inflation and the impact of that on our budgeting. Even though I think our recruiting and hiring looks good, there are some persistent challenges for some certain types of positions, special education and English language education in particular. Those are hard positions to fill. The emergency protocols we've got good, strong leadership team. They know what to do. Our documentation isn't as strong as it needs to be. And with kind of key people who are currently turning over, I'm very, very mindful of the fact that's something we want to lock down soon. The capital improvement that's taken place over the last few years has really positioned the district well, but there is still need out there, and there's also clearly a sense from the town of some fatigue. So the question is, how do we navigate that? You know, what are we going to do to continue to do the things that we know we need to do to make sure buildings are good, safe educational spaces for students? And how do we kind of work with the town to make sure that that happens and that students are part of the prioritization scheme here? And then, you know, the last thing, we don't have good data on enrollment. This is an interesting one. So the current town census data is not a very good or reliable resource for us in understanding who's going to be coming into school. And so that definitely creates another sort of operational challenge. And one of the things I'll note here, I've got a few more. I'm sorry, there's a long haul of me talking, but when I kind of get into the opportunities part, I think that data one's an interesting one for us to think about and talk about. So on the academic front, I frame these in terms of questions. You know, these are the questions I really want the leadership team to be able to wrestle with. You know, how do we get more kids access to really rigorous, high-quality courses? What are the kind of non-traditional pathways, and how do we create more of those for the students who really want them? Just by way of example, folks brought up earlier this year, we have more kids interested in going to Assabet Valley than we are able to get into Assabet Valley. Are there other things we can do internally that can sort of help create pathways for that set of students who really are looking for something that works well for them and their needs? Curriculum alignment is something we can continue to work on, and how are we going to do that? We've got some great structures in place. What's the next step? Thinking about that digital literacy and computer science scope and sequence. thinking about what are we going to do about AI? And that's really a question we're going to start to grapple with tomorrow. We've got a really great group of folks who are going to start to look at policy and practice and make some recommendations for guidelines for educators, but also are there things we need to put in place in terms of expectations and policies for students and for staff. And then, one I wanted to put in here that wasn't a really formal thing, but just something I noticed. I think there are opportunities out there to really make more of student voice. We have a wonderful representative on the school committee here, but thinking about our site councils, thinking about our hiring process, thinking about all the ways where students' kind of contributions to thinking about what works in school, they're the ones living it on a day in and day out basis. So being able to hear from them about what works for them, what isn't working for them, and taking some action. So I'm thinking a lot about that. These, again, parallel some of the challenges on the support. Thinking about that English language learners challenge. What is it that we need? We've got good teaching, we've got a good director, we've got extraordinary classroom teachers. Kind of what's the missing piece in helping people provide more support? We need to kind of make some decisions about student technology use in the schools, and that's kind of coming out of that cell phone policy work that we're doing. The absenteeism question, I think, is a really important one. And it's challenging because I think you can't just sort of mandate it. You have to look at underlying cause. And I want to think a little bit with people about, as we're seeing more students more absent than there used to be, what are we going to do about that? Same thing on the staff side. Like, what can we do to sort of support folks so that they're more likely to be here more of the time, And these are kind of repeats again. I think on the community sense, I really think one of the opportunities to think about is that the schools have, the thing that we have that other groups don't is we have range. We have an ability to access a large sort of swath of the community through communication. So what is it we can do with that in order to kind of help support more community investment and engagement, not only for the sake of our students directly, but sort of parent to parent as well. I think that's an interesting challenge. And then some of these you've heard before on the finance and operations side. How do we strengthen our partnerships with the town? What are we going to do about some sort of financial safety net that helps us in terms of times of volatility, especially with special education? What other kind of partnerships and things can we develop so that in those places where we are still struggling to do high quality hiring, we can kind of maybe grow our own educators or work in close collaboration with some of the local universities. I want to really shore up some of the information about safety and make sure we've got that. And then on the capital front, I think we've got sort of a short term and what I would call it more of a midterm, a 10-year plan. I really think one of the most interesting things I've seen a community do is to develop a sort of much longer long-range plan, so 50 years, 100 years out. It's really, and I know that sounds kind of crazy. I mean, nobody's going to be around. I won't, at least. I don't know. Some of the younger folks up at the dais might be, but the rest of us might be gone. But it is thinking about building lifespan and things like that. If there's a way to sort of start to encourage the community to keep an eye on that and really be planful and mindful of it, because I think buildings are and those sort of large-scale systems within buildings are things that creep up on you, and without having a kind of articulated notion of what is how old and what's going to need replacement at about what time, it takes this enormous community investment that sometimes feels like it then overshadows everything else. So a little planning could at least let people know it's coming, And then the data question is an interesting one. Like, I think I'm thinking a lot about, do we need to do a more robust enrollment study? Are there ways we can partner with the town around kind of their, understanding their data collection so we can extrapolate from that? And those are some of those issues. So this is what you got is sort of like a brain dump version, and it's a lot, but there's, the final draft actually has more stuff. This is sort of a streamlined version for now. This is sort of the everything, and what happens from here is that the leadership team will take whatever comes out at the end of this part of the process to help us really think about being strategic moving forward. So it's not working on everything all the time, it's choosing the things that have the biggest impact and really focusing there. And the purpose of putting this out now is to kind of hear from you, hear from the community outside the schools, hear from educators inside the schools, and just make sure if there's something that I'm missing that feels really big or something that I've kind of misunderstood, I want to know that now before it works its way into a long-term strategy. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So we'll start with questions and discussions. Steve?
Well, I think the outline here is wonderful, and obviously the committee has certain responsibilities in that list of things that are there. If we were in the perfect world, we could figure out how much money any of these things were going to cost and figure out where it was going to come from. In our current form of government, there isn't any real way to do it other than what was suggested by Allison in this list, which simply is to make people aware of what's out there. I would specifically say, based on my tenure here on the school committee, that in fact the quality of the school buildings has been high on the priorities of the school committee, and in fact has been something that we've driven home over the years. The biggest problem that we have is that the cost of anything is so expensive, and so at this point, whether it be for the schools or whether it be for the, for the rest of the community, such as senior centers, fire stations, police stations, and the whole list of other things that are in the bailiwick of the town and the town's government, whether it be school committee or not, is the bigger picture. We can do our job as school committee members to know what the quality of our buildings are. We certainly can know what it takes to build them, and specifically under the state rules as to how you do it, we form a building committee and we then ask the state for money. But again, as I said, the cost of everything is so high. I mean, it used to be, for example, the Fail School was a $55 million project, of which we got something like $19 million back from the state, which meant we carried the difference, and we still do. At this point in time, you really can't even get in the door with a Massachusetts School Building Authority because they're awarding contracts for $200 and $400 million. And so none of this is easy. Certainly, having a very positive approach to this is the thing to do, and certainly this list is it. I just think that, that the way we go about it, what we need is somebody that would give the school committee, let's say, a trust fund of a couple of $1 million, so that in fact we could have, an income from that. That would take us forward as things that would then be discretionary. I know that's not going to happen, but certainly being aware of all these things is the start. And so, and there are roles. There are roles for the superintendent. There are roles for the school district. There are roles for the facilities department, and there are roles for this school committee. And so that is our charge under state law to do our job, to be proactive and do these things. And I'll speak to a couple of those items a little later when we get the school committee reports. But anyway, I support this whole list, and I think the sooner we start to put together who, what, where, and when, the better off we'll be to stay ahead of these things to the extent we can. But don't forget, we might very well be in this mode of just staying afloat for a period of time, a number of years for sure. So I guess that's my take on your list, which is a very good list for sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Go ahead.
So I really enjoyed reading this. It was just, really gratifying to see all of the strengths. And it struck me that a lot of them aligned with our strategic plan, which means that it worked.
Yes.
And we achieved, at least much of what was in there. And some of the challenges and opportunities are probably nice for the next strategic plan, which I think we have coming up soon. So that's good timing. One thing I want to make a plug for, and I know we already have the AI council or committee assembled, which is wonderful. And I keep seeing AI, and I know this is true, that it's challenges and opportunities, but I really hope we will focus on the opportunities. I think it's a relatively inexpensive way for us to innovate. A lot of curriculum innovations cost so much money, but I think training and supporting our students and faculty and staff and using AI responsibly, and I mean, higher education is doing this. There's a huge push in it, and so I really hope that we can, start that at this level. I think private schools are doing it, and Westborough is as good, if not better, than most private schools. So we can, I really hope that we'll focus on the opportunities with AI while supporting the teachers with the challenges around it. But there are so many opportunities. So I'm really thrilled about that committee. And the last thing that I'll say is the financial literacy component. I loved seeing that on there. I know that was part of our strategic plan, and I'm assuming the expansion of the business programs was, because of that initiative in the strategic plan, and it's great. And I have to say the personal finance class at the high school is, I think, a class, like you said, everyone should take. It's an incredible class, and I can't imagine that all the students that want it get it. And so I was really, really happy to see that on there. And I think as much as we can expand that, those offerings, we'd put our students in a really good position. So I'm looking forward to the full report, and thank you for all the work on this.
Thank you. Jakub, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the presentation and the report. I think it shows you've done your homework. You have a good read on the district, and I think the challenges you identified are spot on. I'm curious. I mean, I know you are now at the stage of like here are the challenges, opportunities, and I assume you're going to be seeking feedback from wider community, not just from the leadership.
Yes.
I'm very curious about the digital literacy, computer science, introducing that at early grades. I think 4th grade and above. I notice kids don't understand what internet is. They use it often. They think it's inside Safari. They don't have the mental model of how these basic things work, because they were born with those technologies already omnipresent. And I think that kind of basic, foundational information will be very helpful for them early on, because I think kids can grasp it quite well. Interesting point about the volunteering. I see that in other organizations in town, a drop in participation, and I'm dying to know how we're gonna, try to address that.
Yes.
Because then maybe we can apply it in other places too. We see the same trend, unfortunately, and I don't know how to attribute that. I'm also curious about the financial reporting alignment with the DESI requirements. Do you anticipate that to be done by the next budget season?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. It involves alignment of sort of the software, the Munis, right? So it's a little tricky because we have to kind of work through the town a bit because of payroll and deductions and things like that. But it's, I think we think we can pull it off, especially since we've already identified kind of where the help is going to come from and how we're going to pay for it. So,
yeah. So we have the consultant already that we're going to hire to help us do the conversion, and then we just need the town to help us on their side as well, because there's a back end part of the account numbers that need to be converted on the Munis side, which they would have access to. So we need them to find the time to help us to do that as well. So we're hoping to start in the next month or so, and it'll probably continue for the next 3-4 months, probably, I would like to say. And then what they're going to do is they're going to convert account numbers for FY26, and then they're going to convert all historical accounts as well, so everything aligns.
Oh, that would be great.
All the reports will read nicely.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds great. I think it will make our conversations with the residents easier too.
It will, 100%.
yeah, that's a hopeful outcome. And I think part of, some of the data that you've heard from residents around kind of comparative data, us versus other communities, is coming from a universe where our reporting is sort of jamming our own accounting structure into a different structure at the end of each fiscal year. And if we have it preset ahead of time, I think it doesn't mean they'll necessarily be exact alignment, because districts do make different choices about where they bucket things. So it's never quite perfect, but I think it'll be a little closer. So
Great, thank you. And last question, so these, as a product of this, in May you will come back with some kind of a long-term plan, and that will be woven into the new revision of the strategic plan.
So I think what you'll see in May is sort of a full-on report that actually has some back-end data that shows where these sort of these thoughts came from. So that's really the goal of May, and that will come after. I've shared this out internally inside the district. I'm going to push this out to parents at the end of this week, so the kind of wider community has it. And I want to give people a couple weeks to tell me, what they think. That plan in May, then I take into the summer leadership retreat, and we'll start talking about strategic planning moving forward. And I want to differentiate between a strategic plan and a district strategy. And I know that sounds like I'm just moving the words around a little bit, but really, a classic strategic plan is often very, very large and has a lot of moving parts and a lot of complexity. A district strategy is a little bit more streamlined and focused, and really looks at what are the big buckets of things you're going to be working on. How are you going to talk about them? How do they align with your mission, vision, and values? And from there you can kind of start to get into the weeds of a plan. We still have 1 year left on the existing strategic plan, so the goal first and foremost is to come up with that high-level strategy to kind of knock out the rest of the pieces of the current strategic plan and then tee up the next one. So that'll all be work that happens starting this summer and then gets finished out over next year, so that we're really ready with a really strong strategic plan for 2026 and on.
Mm-hmm. Oh, perfect timing. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jakub, Tim.
Thank you, Allison, for your presentation and all the work on this. My first question is regarding curriculum alignment. So I believe that you specifically called out the humanities, but I am curious. I know that when we were talking about the Tier 1 cuts and what we're going to be losing, that one of those positions was related to looking at these kind of things. So can you speak at all, is this affected by those cuts that we just made?
So I don't think we made a cut in Tier 1. It was in Tier 2, so thankfully, no, not yet. And we got to hold off on that, which is great. Those positions are really instrumental in helping to support it, alignment from classroom to classroom, and I would very much prefer to hold on to those folks so that we can continue to deploy them to do that work.
Gotcha. So glad to hear that was not cut, but just confirming that is, it sounds like what those
still here. Yeah.
that staff do. Perfect. And then my second question was related to financial literacy as well. Mm-hmm. I want to echo what Jane said, in that I was very happy to see that this was included, and that there is some thought around this. I am curious, I know that you might not have this answer, but it sounded like we don't know exactly what it will look like in terms of just ability to put this in, but would you say that the goal would be to have this be almost similar to like a health class where like every student has to go through it at least once?
I think so. I think there are a lot of different approaches, and I think they're big questions to answer. So a lot of different places have taken different approaches. Technically, financial literacy lives in the social studies frameworks, which is interesting. It's not in math. And yet it's very hard to find space because of all the other requirements in social studies or in math. So I think districts have had to be very creative about where and how they get at it. Some of the things that I think are really promising and interesting are actually starting pretty early, actually having middle school age kids embed it into some of their work at that level when you aren't quite as locked up with different requirements. You can actually have some initial work in math and in social studies and in some of the other kind of elective classes, or not elective, but the kind of rotation of specials classes. At the high school level, I'm coming from a district where, interestingly, a student initiative got it sort of started there as a seminar class, and it was kind of like a, drop in, see us during your X block, your kind of study block, and it was a student who had partnered with the teacher to kind of kick this off, and as chance would have it, as I was walking around the high school recently, I was in a class where there were some student interns, and what they're working on with their teacher who's supervising their internship is developing a financial literacy seminar for their classmates. So it's kind of fun to see that parallel happening. But, one place to sort of build something might be through working with the guidance department or the counseling department in thinking about kind of college and career readiness. Really, what are the things that we're doing for sophomores, juniors, and seniors to look ahead to planning for college and for life? Because a lot of the decision making about even what kind of college to go to is really tied up nowadays with financial considerations for many families, and having kids get that not just from their parents, but a little bit on the school side might be a place to look. We'll have to kind of really pull people together and talk about it. It is hard whenever you talk about adding things because you can't just fit more stuff in the bucket. Something has to come out, or you have to find a place. So,
thank you. My next question is relating to ELL. I know that was on there a lot, both in the strength column and also the weakness.
Yes.
I feel like I continue to harp on this, but I am just very fixated on, I know that when we're talking about the federal cuts and what that would look like, specifically there was a lot of, the biggest item was related to teachers for ELL. And so I know at the last, I believe it was the last meeting or the meeting before, I had asked about that, and you said essentially that it would not look like if we lost that federal grant money, it wouldn't just be cutting ELL teachers, it would be reallocating the pie and what that looks like. It just seems like this is something that is a strength and that we're working on a lot, but is still a weakness in terms of we are continuing to try to figure out and how to do it exactly right. And I know that you do not have a crystal ball and might not be able to say, but if the federal money is to dry up, is that something that you see reallocating that money? I'm assuming that likely ELL would still take some kind of cut, even if not the entirety of that lost grant. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the scale of the cut that we're thinking about, if that all dries up, is going to impact everywhere. I want to be clear-eyed about that. I don't think you could cut just in one place or another. It would probably be just sort of an approach similar to what we had to take just even to navigate the budget season. Is you want to think about how do you spread things out so one group of kids, one grade level, one school isn't disproportionately impacted. Some of the services for English language learners and for students with disabilities they're just not negotiable. They're actually required by law. And so that's the bind. I mean, I think if we are going to make any cuts, we have to do so very carefully because some of our students have required service minutes in terms of their face time with teachers who are qualified to teach English as a second language. We can't remove that without running afoul of their civil rights. And so we'll have to look elsewhere in those cases. Yeah, nor should we. I just want to be clear. I don't think we should remove them, but yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you. And then my final question is relating to the absenteeism.
Yes.
I know it's on the opportunity slide of like, what can we do about this, and like, how can we try to bring these kids back in? Can you speak a little bit to what we're currently doing to try to engage with the family? Like, is it direct outreach to try to figure out what's going on, how to re-engage these kids?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to talk with about that. Kim Tynan would be great, but I do think that we have developed over the past few years a strong kind of clinical team, actually, in terms of our mental health supports in the schools and our approach to counseling. And my understanding is that when students are starting to show signs of school avoidance and school absenteeism, we have people who are really doing that direct outreach, partnering with families, looking at wraparound support, so ways to help connect families to service providers outside of the schools as well. So having Shrewsbury Youth and Family Service as part of the community is key, and a lot of their service provided so far, when you look at their total, is coming to families with school-age children. So I think those are the things that people have started working on. I think systemically, thinking about bigger structures can be helpful too. Thinking about things like schedules and the kind of way, when you have a very traditional schedule at the high school, for example, where you've got all your classes in a day, that also means you've got all your homework in that day. Some schools have found some success with a kind of schedule that rotates and has fewer classes per day, allows a little more focus, and then you're not dealing with everything all the time. So a lot of those things are possibilities as well to explore. But again, these are just topics to dive into. I'm not the person who's going to answer the question. I just need to ask the question and then make sure other people come up with a good answer.
Awesome. And thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. This was really thorough, and I too enjoyed reading it. I thought it was very thoughtful. One of my questions was, because I know you brought this up when you first came into our district, about how Westwood used their census data and relied on it. I think you had said this, relied on it for looking at entry. And I'm curious, what do we use here if our census data is not reliable, and is it accurate? What is the method that we use here?
Well, we use whoever shows up and registers for kindergarten. I mean, we depend upon the town to do a census, but if they're not getting good response rate, then the date, that's the rub in terms of what's different between some other communities, and so. So that's how we do it. We basically use a running 4-year average in terms of our kindergarten size, just to predict what we think might be the kindergarten enrollment for the following year, and then we track it from January when we open it up until the fall.
Daniel's very modest. What we use is Daniel's really fancy spreadsheet that he's developed with tracking data over the arc of the last decade. And it's about as good as we can get. Thankfully, enrollment here has been pretty stable. But now that we're in this moment where it's falling off here, and it's kind of falling off in a lot of places throughout the state, having a better data source would be helpful. For example, those reductions that we talked about in the budget process in terms of classrooms and places where we don't need as many teachers, they are going to disproportionately be at one of our elementary schools that fails, which also happens to be this beautiful new shiny building. So I think getting the good data will allow us to think about, how do we make sure we're kind of sending students, thinking about districting too. I think I put that down. I didn't say it out loud, but I should say it out loud. We are going to need to think about kind of where the district lines are, how we make sure that we're kind of really taking advantage of this beautiful building that the community invested into. So
okay, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Regarding the absenteeism, so I think you touched on this already, but I'm going to go ahead and ask anyway. So is the data telling us that it is more mental health related causes for the absenteeism, or there was, I know you had alluded earlier in the year to, or perhaps maybe our previous superintendent did, to taking extended vacations or going for extended periods of time, and that's creating the absenteeism. So I was trying to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I need to do a little deeper dive into what the different causes are. I think the big shift that's happened here and everywhere else is really around, it's sort of two-pronged. One is, there really have been dramatically shifting norms around illness, right? It used to be if you had a cold, you came to school. Nowadays, that's less likely than it was. Things are swinging a little bit that direction, but COVID really changed. It also changed things for parents. So people who work in the district, have their own children, can't come to work if their kids can't come to school because they have a cold. So I think that's sort of the big thing. Mental health is a factor. I do think there are some shifting norms about vacation time too. And I do want to kind of look at that. I think part of what's driving that, as Steve mentioned, is everything costs more now. And so for families, especially if you've got a family of 4 or 5 and you want to take a vacation, doing that during the school vacation weeks turns out to be a very expensive prospect. And I think folks look at time on either end of that or other times a year sometimes as a relief to that expense, especially if their vacation is actually to travel and see family and loved ones. So I think those are all things that we just need to unpack and understand. Some of the things we'll be able to maybe help. Some of the things we won't be able to do anything about. I don't want to sort of beat my head against the wall trying to solve a problem that's not ours. But if there are things we can control in terms of making the environment really healthy and supportive for the adults who work here and the kids who learn here, those are the things we want to be investing in.
Okay, thank you. Another question I had, or I appreciate that you made note of this with respect to the AP access and also VHS and how that fits in, especially when it comes to talking about curriculum alignment and how that in and of itself is a struggle when you have VHS classes. I don't know how they actually manage it, because I do think they have sections that'll run simultaneously that'll be in class, but then the if there's a spillover, those students are put into VHS, which I can only imagine how challenging it must be. Daniel would know more in terms of how to align the curriculum in that respect as well, right?
Yeah, it certainly is.
So I appreciate you looking into that, because I think that that's a big thing. And then lastly, I just wanted to speak a little bit to, parent participation. I think that's probably such a multifaceted issue, and for so many, you just have to come at it from so many different angles to try and understand it. I think it's important that we look at the vehicles that we are utilizing to engage parents. So I'm curious about those and their effectiveness, whether it's Power School or whatever it is that we're using it as means of communication, whether those are being utilized, whether the access is there, whether there's language barriers, especially with our changing community. I think those are all really important factors, because if anything that I've observed is that parent participation has certainly gone down in many respects, but I think it's to some degree lack of access, and I'm concerned about that. So,
no, I think that's it's a good point. It's definitely I think that relying on things in writing is a thing that districts are starting to move away from. Being able to have a stronger social media presence, being able to do more things on video, making sure that translation is good. Coming up with the kind of other strategies around communication, I think is interesting, and really thinking of it not as a one-way thing. It's not just always pushing out. It's like, how do you create sort of opportunities for people to contribute to? So
absolutely. Anyways, thank you so much. And do any of you have any other further questions? If not, then I guess we would be moving on to citizens' requests. Is anyone here to speak? Gretchen? No, okay.
One of these days.
Yeah. And now we've got school committee reports. So can we start with Steve?
Okay, well, last time I spoke to this issue, we talked about 3 projects that I was interested in doing, and 2 of the 3 are underway. Actually, we're having a meeting at Hastings on Monday morning to sit down with the team, which is the principal, Julia DeGata, and Kelly, myself, Tim, and 2 other members, to just talk about the issue of traffic flow in the morning and the afternoon. I've had private discussions with Kelly and with Julia about those issues that I saw as I was, watching people do their thing in the morning as well as in the afternoon. So I think we have a pretty good handle on what the problems are, trying now to enlist all the players who could be helpful in what we need to do. And so that will be the subject matter of what we talk about on Monday. The second thing that I had mentioned that I was interested in was the contract issues associated with the Mill Pond chiller, and I've had discussions with our facilities director in regards to how that is progressing. And from what I understand so far, it's going very well, that there are opportunities for us to save money in how we do this, which ultimately would be the ability to use the state bid program where there are already pre-approved contractors to do this kind of work, in which case then we would avoid many big ticket costs to do it. So in effect, we would be buying the equipment and have it installed by the same supplier. And then the last piece is the Armstrong School, and I hope to sit down with Kelly and others in regards to the beginning of the process relative to Armstrong and the ability to air condition that part of the building that's not air conditioned. There are some physical constraints, and that is that the ability of the roof at Armstrong to support much more than what it is very limited. So some unique ideas, particularly one that we used at Hastings, to resolve that and save a lot of money relative to structural resupport in order to support the items, the hardware items that would provide the mechanical process of air conditioning. And the other thing that I guess I'd bring up a number of months ago, and I think it was in the beginning of our budget process, where we were discussing the issue of Assabet Regional and our access to supply students there. I asked for a report on what are our obligations under the contract with Assabet, so we could know as a school committee what the terms of that are, so that we can either react to it relative to Assabet or how we parallel with that kind of education here in our school system. So I will put that to you to talk to the Assabet Regional town representative, ask him to come here and answer that question. What are our obligations as the town of Westborough to Assabet Regional? I know we have a rep that's elected from this town. He's been there for years and years and years, longer than me. So I'm sure that he knows the ins and outs of that question. I do want to know what it would take for the town of Westborough to be able to send more students there. That's the point.
One thing, to note, and I think it's important as a data point, is that our enrollment has crept up over the last few years, which is nice. So essentially the way—
But I will point out that it started this way,
yeah,
and that's how it now creeps.
Okay, so we were there before we got here.
But we used to have more seats, if you will.
Okay, yeah, that's important. They have an admissions strategy that if you have eligible students who want to go and they don't have enough seats, if you take advantage of the extra seats that other people don't have, it increases you over time, right? Yeah. You sort of, your number of seats is based on your enrollment of the last 3 years. So every time you grab a new seat, you create more opportunity for the future.
Well, it would be very nice to have that written up so that we all have a copy of it, so that if it comes up again, we don't have to deal with it. What is and who does and where do we get the information? Sure. Thank you.
Jane, go ahead.
Nothing to report.
Yakub.
Nothing to report.
Tim.
Sure. I will just quickly say thank you to all the parents that took the time to fill out the survey relating to the cell phone use. I don't have anything to report at the moment, but the conversation is ongoing, so looking forward to having an update in the future, but nothing else to report.
Could you speak to the participation Like how many people responded?
Sure. I'm not sure, Allison, if you know that off the top of your
I'll
head.
pull it up. It was a lot, actually. I'll find it right now. We had 886 total responses. So pretty high level of parent response. And I think it was good kind of fodder for conversation in the committee. I think we did see parents generally supportive of kind of a bell-to-bell type of policy, even through the high school, although some of the data indicated differences in understanding what that meant. So I think we had some conversation about that. And then, we're really talking and thinking a little bit about if there's a shift, what are the steps that would need to take place in order to make that shift workable? Because there are a lot of other considerations we have to navigate too. We want to learn from other districts that have tried this if we end up going in that direction. The committee hasn't quite landed the bus yet, and I think there's a lot of community engagement we'd need to go through before we made anything sort of radical. As you're aware, there are, for high school kids with jobs, after school activities, things like that, there's some considerations. We really need to engage the faculty because they're an important part of this process. And then, folks with medical needs too, I think. So there are these complexities to it. It's not a simple throw a switch type of thing. One of the things we talked about at the last meeting is getting out to visit some of the districts where they've tried it, to really talk boots on the ground with people about how it's going, what have they seen that's gone well, what are the challenges that they wish they had gotten out in front of before they tried this. So.
Rian.
A few updates on the schools. So the Fails, they had a glow dance in the past week, and it was a success, and the families really enjoyed the event. And then they still have a food pantry collection week from the 14th to the 18th for snack items such as goldfish, granola bars, and more. Hastings will have Eli MCAS for third graders next week. At Armstrong, the first graders have a Stregonona performance this Friday on the 11th during the morning. At Mill Pond, tomorrow some sixth graders have a field trip to the Christie McCaffrey Center, and other sixth grade classes are going on April 6th. At Gibbons, after April break, there's going to be a regional science and engineering fair in Worcester on the 29th for students. And then at the high school, the Micah Festival was a huge success with numerous of our performing arts programs getting gold and silver. Some business students that are a part of an FBLA club at the high school got the opportunity to go to Bentley University, and they gained experience and listened to speakers regarding different aspects of business, and they got to visit some of the facilities offered at Bentley as well. The high school is going to have their first ever annual girls flag football game for junior and senior girls. And then once the teams are selected, they're going to have scheduled practice, and then they will play an under the lights game on May 9th. And all of our spring sports are off to a great start as well. And then lastly, for the entire town, the Cradles for Crayons Spring Green and Clothing Drive is still ongoing, with donations being accepted until April 11th this Friday.
Thank you. Okay, I think since we're done with that, we can go ahead and move on to the approval of minutes for March 26, 2025. Do we have a motion?
So move.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
5-0-0. And I think, does somebody want to make a motion to adjourn? I think that completes our meeting agenda.
Sure. I will move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? 5-0-0. Okay, adjourned.